How you doing?
Hey, Ramon, how are you doing tonight?
Doing okay. Uh, I completely recovered from what happened to me after January 6th. I spent like maybe 2.5 months
Yeah,
having problems, sleeping and all that. But it looks like the guy's been out of the news, long enough that I'm forgetting. And I'm walking, an hour a day, and that's making my sleep much better. And is Chuck coming
So
today?
I think this wasn't this the weekend that his son was getting married. I can't keep it straight, but I think he had other commitments.
Okay, the last time I had to apologize because I called Kendrice by the wrong name. Her name is Kendrice, okay? Hello?
and
Bobby?
Greece.
Pronounce it for me.
Kendrice, Kendrice, okay?
Okay.
And today she's not going to be here because she's driving to what is that? She's driving to Memphis, but to make sure that I kind of rail her in, I told her not to worry about it because I was going to send her a private link of the discussion so she wouldn't miss anything.
Good.
Okay, and
What was the book?
huh?
What's the book that she mentioned?
Oh, she mentioned a bunch of books. Let me see if I have them. I actually wrote them down. Okay, uh, I actually wrote them down. Can you people see what I have?
Well,
She
something about casinos.
she
Yeah.
she came up with those books. Okay, do you see that? Can you? I can make it a little bit bigger.
I'd rather we got casinos.
Okay, I did some reflection about what you said and what I said, trying to think about whether I was stereotyping because she was black. One of the things that I was stereotyping is that she would only be interested in race, okay? And then I reflected a little bit about what Bobby was saying, that it's better to pick a different topic each week, okay? And that way, if you don't want to read the whole book, that's fine, okay? So I thought that was pretty good idea to each time take turns in how would I say it, in uh, take turns in basically organizing. Each one takes a week organizing a discussion. Okay, uh, and let me go ahead and share the screen for a minute. Okay, if I may. Okay, here's what I was actually thinking about today. Uh, when we finish the book today, I think we should spend a little bit of time, discussing how those three books have changed outlook uh, toward blacks. Okay, and if there's anything we intend to do about racism, that would be a good thing at the end to see if this had any effect. Okay, and now I'll tell you what my effect on me was. The main effect that it has had on me is that when I looked on television, I saw somebody, a black person that was really on the news and all that. My feelings were, I'm glad that they're giving that black person an opportunity. That's the way I was thinking. But now when I see a black person online, I say that person must be exceptional to have overcome all this humiliation and all that. So, my focus right now is on the suffering that that person must have gone through, that it must be an exceptional person to be there. So that's the way my outlook has changed. When I see a black person, so maybe at the end, uh, people can actually elaborate on that. That was kind of like what I was thinking. I was actually proposing how the next meeting, and this is what I am proposing. Okay, can you people see that?
Yeah.
Okay, there's a book called Dark Money, how the billionaires are doing all kinds of things. Ken did that, and I have a couple of reviews of that. And I was suggesting that we actually watch the movie Two Popes. Is an Academy Award nominee. It's wonderfully made. It's in Netflix, and the reason I'm saying that is because that book is, I mean, one pope is arguing with the other, and there's two conceptions of Christianity, one emphasizing sexual conduct, and the other one is a love to the poor. And you can see the two discussions going from one to the other, and it's fun. And then I was thinking to conclude that, follow that with reading this article that's only 4 pages long. I mean, actually, how money is dividing the American Catholicism, and the reason why I'm connecting all of that, because you can see right there what I read in Dark Money, and these Catholics supposedly that are connected to the Koch brothers are trying to infiltrate the Catholic Church and change the direction of the prosperity gospel. So I think these things actually tie together. And, so the meeting itself would be, Ramon would summarize Dark Money, Ken would summarize Evil Geniuses and what it says, everybody discusses the two popes, and then we discuss the article, Dividing American Catholicism. So that's what I propose that we do the next time. And then the time afterwards, somebody else, Bobby or Ken or Paul or Chuck, whatever, or Ken Dries, we take turns and proposing a session.
That
Does
seems
this make like a reasonable?
I think I'm fine with doing that for next week.
How about you,
Yeah,
Ken?
I would agree that it's an interesting way to go about it as opposed to going through a book. I think, for anyone, you seem to do a much better job at really tackling the headlines on a daily basis than I think some of us in the group necessarily have time to do. So I think it's a good format, but I think that it's going to be difficult to create a well laid out plan like you have for the rest of us. I'm not saying it's not impossible, but I think it's going to be a different type of work than what we're used to doing.
Well, he will be even make it more manageable. If somebody misses a session, it's not going to be a problem. It's easier to handle. And we can expand, like Chuck said, about movies and things like that. We can make it more interesting. We have more freedom. By the way, you told me something that insults me, by the way. I spend maybe at most half an hour a day on headlines because I feel that those people are trying to hijack my attention. And if I let the CNN and all those people, I'm going to go, this guy killed somebody, the guy jumped on somebody, the guy did that. So I made a point of doing that very quickly and then reading articles that are long.
You've done a great job at pulling up very interesting articles. So, what you sent out in the last week with with those interesting pieces with the highlights, it's very well done. But I mean, that's not a work of a half hour a day. That's more intensive work.
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is, I spend finding out the headline, this guy killed somebody, whatever.
Yeah, no, I think you do a really good job.
But then what I do, I don't want to spend more time like that because I know I'm being manipulated into paying things that are not really doing anything for me. Just trying, to begin with, half of those people, all they're trying to do is get me outraged at something, And I don't want to do that. Like that Ken doesn't want to do that. But for example, one article that I read yesterday that I thought it was fantastic is the one by David Brooks. Do you people see that one by David Brooks about wisdom?
I read it.
Yeah, I don't think I saw that one, but I looked at the majority of the rest of the ones you sent.
Well, that one I didn't. I don't know if you have a subscription to the New York Times.
Yeah, I do.
Well, anyway, that was the New York Times, and I think David Brooks has got. I learned a lot about what wisdom is. And, the main thing that I learned in that article is that wisdom is not about knowing, but it's about behavior. how you listen to other people and all of that. I mean, it's really. But anyway, an article like that, I'm not going to pick it up, but I mean, an article like that somebody picks 1 week and we,
Yeah.
enhance it and all that, that will create a really great discussion. My bias is to always have an article that has a moral component, some kind of examination of how we should behave as human beings. That's kind of my bias. Okay.
That's good. I mean, I think that's a very practical way to approach this. If we're gonna evolve ourselves, we have to engage in this challenging discussion. We have to engage in thought and analysis. Otherwise, we're just telling stories.
Well, I don't have anything else to say. Maybe we can start with the book. And then, Bobby, can you? I mean, you're the one that is the most successful in keeping me quiet. So,
I have this comment, and that is, you suggested that at the end of our time today, that we reflect on what has been the impact of the 3 books we've read. I think the epilogue of this book is going to help us do that.
Yes.
yeah, I agree. I know you suggested doing that at the end. I just wanted to go ahead and, I looked at it and I kind of tried to synthesize, a couple of points that we might want to get out of that epilogue.
Okay. Paul, I think you have the,
Yeah, I got 28 and 29, so I'll start out. 28 is a very short chapter. The title of the chapter is Democracy on the Ballot. And, the author really just, she's really engaging in discussion with a cohort, trying to understand where things were in terms of the sentiment. So she doesn't say if she's talking to another African American or not, but they're discussing the reality of the caste system and where it feels like this country's at. And, it went back and forth. Well, the person that she was talking to was saying it feels like we were more in the 50s. And then she said, well, it feels more like the 1880s. And, the characteristics of what happened in that time. It's really more just a dialogue chapter. And at the end of, so, one of the key points that came out of this discussion was they referenced the fact that it's fair, the demographic projections out to 2042 is that we're really going to be I can't spit it out, majority minority country where basically white people are not going to constitute the majority. And they, at the end of the chapter, they really just agreed that it was a question that they could not settle. She is obviously reflecting on some differences between what it was like at the tail end of the Obama presidency and what it felt like during the Trump administration. And it's a very short chapter. I don't think it's a standout. I think a lot of it is just dialogue. One of the comments that stands out is what we're seeing in the 21st century, 21st century version of a backlash. The tools will be different than before. This is referring to the caste system and its ability to try to maintain its dominancy. So the point that the 21st century is going to look different than previous centuries makes perfect sense. But at the end of the day, the dynamic is still about the caste system maintaining its position.
Let me mention something that I read. One of the things that I read recently is that this thing about 2020, whatever, the white people being replaced,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
actually an exaggeration. Many people that when they grow up will identify themselves as being white, and other people thinking of them as white are more than, the only people are going to end up thinking that they're white and behaving like white. So it's not really what we're talking about. And what is really going on. The other thing that I mentioned is that every foreigner that I know that has a profession, even Muslim guys and all that.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, they start looking, they start behaving and thinking like me. I mean, uh, they want, the Muslim friends that I have, their daughters to be doctors. They want to do that. They're really, America, when you're educated, absorbs you in a more of a way than people might realize.
Well, I think there is one closing question in this chapter that sort of sums it up. And the person that she's discussing this with is named Taylor, gentleman named Taylor. And he said, so the real question would be, if people were given a choice between democracy and whiteness, how many would choose whiteness? And, I think this is unfortunately what we're dealing with today. I'd love to wish that is not the case, but, here we are. You can look at anything that's making the headlines now. The mass gun violence, the continued, they're making headline stories, but you have to recognize that, it's not as random as it would appear. And this is a reflection of, the number of situations that have occurred in the last few days with police forces across the country with their confrontation with members of the non-dominant class. Is it coincidence? How many of these events occur? Are they filtering to the top of the news cycle because this is where things are being manipulated? They're open questions. What I believe is that we're seeing a rise in this because at the end of the day, many of the folks who are police officers have a pretty biased worldview for a range of reasons. I've had several members of my family were police officers or involved with that. And it's a very difficult job. And over time, especially when you deal with the criminal element, it tends to be a reinforcing set of bigotry or bigoted ideas are part of the reality.
Now, let me mention something. I read an article in The Atlantic at one time drawing parallels what happened before the Civil War and what is happening now, okay?
Yeah.
And before the Civil War, whites had to choose between democracy and whiteness. And you know how that turned out. And they're saying that we're very similar to that situation, nowadays. And, that will actually, by the way, do you see what Pat, do you people,
Pat Robertson, Pat Robertson, televangelist.
do you people see that what Pat Robinson said recently?
Yeah.
I didn't quite.
Yeah, I watched it.
Do you people see what Pat Robinson said?
I'm sorry, see what, Ramon?
What Pat Robertson, which is a big deal. I like to play that. It's about a minute. So you see that actually what can be happening.
Yeah, I watched the clip. I thought it was an interesting.
We're talking about Pat Robertson, okay, which is a
televangelist. Controversial figure. You can say Pat Robertson. Yeah, he's controversial. He's about as conservative as they come. Here's Pat Robertson with an impassioned plea to end the police violence. Pat Robertson.
I am pro-police, folks. I think we need the police. We need their servants, and they do a good job. But if they don't stop this onslaught, they cannot do this. The police in Virginia picked up a lieutenant in the Army and began to give him trouble. And our state police are highly trained. But why they don't stop this? And this thing is going on in Minnesota, but Derek Chauvin, they ought to put him under the jail. He has caused so much trouble by kneeling on the death of George Floyd. It's just, on his neck. It's just terrible what's happening. And the police, why don't they open their eyes to what the public relations are? They've got to stop this stuff.
Open their eyes.
Anyway, how do people like that?
Yeah, it's interesting that Robertson would come out with this. Obviously, even though he's a conservative guy, obviously he's speaking from the heart in this situation, and he's recognizing that at the end of the day, this is a huge public relations challenge that calls into question the authority of police because of the fact that they behave so badly in many situations.
Yeah, but-
Anyone who has seen any of, so, you know, this stuff has been in the headlines, and if you've seen any of the headlines around any of this stuff, you know, because of the fact that people are now protecting themselves with dash cams, because of the fact that it's becoming more difficult for police to conceal the body camera footage that they're required to have. What's become very clear is that the nature of these events are more and more reflecting bias and bigotry on the police than they are anything else.
Okay, my impression, by the way, my impression is that Paul Robinson was real, Paul, what's his name?
Pat Roberts.
Pat Robinson was really honest. It's one of the things about radicalizing, you know, when people realize that there's something wrong. And I think that the guy was just simply saying, this is plain wrong. And then he was just using as a device to change the police, say, hey, I mean, if you don't think this is wrong, don't do it. You know, don't do it because it's bad for you. So he was really kind of trying to use that as a persuasive, but I don't think it was his argument that this is bad optics and all that. He was really talking from his heart, in my opinion.
Well, I think it is his role as a spiritual leader for a lot of people. It was appropriate for him to speak out. I think he's in a position that he could not remain quiet. He felt it was morally incorrect to not speak out. So I give the guy credit for having the courage to say something that's obviously not going to go over well with some of the people who follow him. But I think he's right. I think he was right to say what he said. And, you know, in my book, he gets credit for at least touching on this reality. I mean, you know, I don't think I heard him say that it was morally wrong, that this behavior was absolutely inappropriate. He coached it in terms of public relations. So in some ways, you know, I won't say he pulled his punch, but he really did not bring, you know, the Christian message that he should more appropriately bring around this, how we treat each other.
I think I heard in his tone the Christian message. He may not have been explicit.
Well, I mean, he obviously has the skills to be explicit. So I think he's doing as much, he's getting as far over the line as he feels comfortable with. He gets credit for speaking up.
We also listened to only a minute of it.
Of course.
Who knows what the guy said, you know? I mean, I know he didn't speak to just one, you know, I mean, I know. You see, notice what the agenda was of the agenda of the guy who presented Pat Robinson was to show that it was an outrage. It's such an outrage that even somebody as bad as Pat Robinson thinks it's an outrage. That was his script. And then he picked a part of Pat Robinson that actually supported that even Pat Robinson thought it was an outrage. But I'm sure Pat Robinson, when he spoke for more than a couple of minutes, and he would have emphasized Christianity. So we can't think that what Pat Robinson is that minute, you know?
Yeah, everything gets edited. I mean, I agree. All right, we ready to go on? Anybody have any comments about 28? I think it was a brief chapter. I think that, you know, it was an interesting dialogue. Are we ready for 29?
Yes.
Okay, 29 is entitled "The Price We Pay for a Caste System." This is a deeper chapter, and you know, I really like the the high level message that the authoress gives here. You know, and she just cites very simply. She cites a lot of things that talk about the nature of how the United States trails many other countries and our peers, the developed economies, and that the central point that she's trying to make is this is endemic to the nature of the fact that we have a caste system in which it's more important that we maintain the caste system maintains the people at the bottom in the positions that they're in for the benefit of the people at the top. And one of the things that the sense that I've had throughout this entire book, it goes into so many things, but it tends to not discuss the economic advantages that are conveyed to being at the top. And I strongly believe that at a certain level, that has become the dominant element of why this caste system continues to remain in place. And, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a distribution of wealth that has been skewed to advantage for a time over 400 years. And, Piketty, in fact, Piketty, Capitalism of the 21st Century, he devotes an entire chapter of his book in his analysis talking about the value, the distribution of wealth in the South that resulted from slavery. And, so even in that one chapter in his large book, only tells a fraction of the story here. It's very hard to really appreciate the economic underliers and what we're talking about here, but I strongly believe that it represents a significant portion of what's going on. But let's keep going with this chapter. She says, compared to our counterparts in the developed world, America can be a harsh landscape, less benevolent society than wealthy nations. It's a price we pay for our caste system. In places with a different history and hierarchy, it is not necessarily seen as taking away from one's own prosperity if the system looks out for the needs of everyone. And I feel strongly that the question, when you reduce it to a very basic question, it's how you see the world. Are we in a zero sum? Do we live in a world that's zero sum, or do we live in a world where zero sum, I win, you lose, or do we live in a world that's economically different than that, where all of our wins can be additive? I mean, that's a fundamental question. Whether you believe in your dominant view of economics is an economics of scarcity, or it's an economics of something more. That's the open question.
Let me mention something, by the way, about what you said about that. At the end of this book, there's a statement that marginalized people, the lower caste, really fought for affirmative action.
Yeah.
And affirmative action ended up benefiting women.
Yep.
So, I mean, the fact that they actually were against, not affirmative action, anti-discrimination,
yeah,
improving the condition for blacks, also improve the condition for a bunch of other people. So it's not like when you improve the condition for blacks, it's just at the expense of somebody else. By improving the condition of all humans, there is a benefit.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I mean, this chapter is really cluttered with a lot of examples. The authoress talks about someone who won American physicist who won a Nobel Prize. At the end of the day, his medical expenses and his physical health were such that he had to auction off his Nobel Prize because of the fact that there was no other way for him to manage his medical bills. That's a characteristic of the society we live in, where the only people who get adequate medical care are the people at the top. And everybody else, as you move further down, the people who get the least support from the medical system in the United States are people who are poor, which generally tend to be members of the lowest caste, at least partially.
An argument that being kind of persuasive sometimes. I mean, I'm not very good at persuading people, but anyway, the big deal is I read a book that said the following thing: do you think that Saudi Arabia is as productive as it can be when it doesn't let women do what they can do? So of course not. If women were working and doing everything, it would be a more productive country. So the question is, how does that apply to the United States? I mean, you think the United States is going to be better when you keep a group of people down and not being able to contribute because you discriminate against them, you don't feed the kids.
Right.
And, anyway, one of the things that Biden is trying to do is kind of get rid of childhood poverty. And I have a neighbor right here who adopted a kid from Ukraine. And that kid, that little girl, was actually 11 months old when she got adopted. And before that, she was in there with deprivation and all that. They never could turn her around.
Yeah.
They never could turn her around. She has impulse control problems, attention problems, because of what they did to that kid, you know. So, you know, anyway, that's what I.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think the author in this chapter really makes some key points. You know, when she talked about healthcare, she says the majority of America's peer nations have some form of free or low cost healthcare coverage. The writer Jonathan Chait noted America's singular indifference, unique among developed nations, towards helping all of its citizens. And, you know, what she says is a caste system builds a rivalry and distrust and a lack of empathy towards one's fellows. The result is that the United States, for all its wealth and innovation, lags in a majority of indicators of quality of life among leading countries. So, you know, this is really, in the author's mind, this is really the price we're paying for this system that has been in place for nearly 400 years. I'm not going to go through all of the details, but, you know, she cites gun violence. She cites that we put more people in prison. You know, the argument from the NRA is that more guns makes everything better. It makes America safer. Well, we know from statistics that it's actually, I think she says in here it's 50, but the true number is 60 some odd percent. The total number of firearms in the entire world controlled under civilian control is, it's actually right around, it's like 46 or 47%. So she did say 50% here. It's very difficult to estimate that. That number comes from a Swiss think tank who has been following this for a number of years. So if more guns makes a country safer, why do we have all this violence and why are we putting so many people in jail? And she's trying to tie this all back to our essential organization around this hierarchy. So if you're at the top, you want to be protected. If you're at the top, you want a judicial system and a system of property rights that ensures that your gains are always protected and that crime is punished. And, you know, the shame being, of course, that some people, I'm not saying that this is necessarily the reason, but when you're at the bottom, you know, when guns and drugs have a greater opportunity for you to get ahead than education and hard work, you're going to pick guns and drugs every time. So I think we have a challenge in this country, and I think this author is right in saying that some of this is a consequence of this caste system that's built up in inequity over 400 years in a way certain groups have been treated versus the people at the top. You know, I think that this author makes a fair argument in this chapter that this caste system has really, in many ways, damaged this country. The fact that we lag behind so many of our, you know, in terms of our peer would be the developed, advanced economies. We're finishing far behind in many areas. Infant mortality, she talks about American student scores near the bottom against our peer nations in math and reading. You know, she gives a lot of examples about how we're not, you know, being the most wealthy country in the world, you know, based around high ideals and a concept that some would say is a meritocracy by design. We really fall far short of that, and it's costing us a lot. This book is laden with a lot of examples. She talks about the pandemic and how that the pandemic has really exposed flaws in our healthcare system. And I'll kind of say one further because I really believe, I kind of honestly believe this, that part of and this is my bias, part of the positioning around the pandemic and the slow bell of the Republicans around the pandemic, because at a very core level, they recognize that the pandemic, when it was mostly in the cities, benefited the Republican Party politically, because at the end of the day, the greatest resistance to Republican policy comes from dense urban areas. So if the urban areas are the ones that are going to suffer the most from the pandemic, maybe slow belling it achieves a longer term political objective. I won't say I'm cynical, but Donald Trump obviously didn't know how to embrace this issue. He was 100% focused on the fact that as we shut down the economy, it was going to destroy his legacy argument for a second term.
Okay, I wonder if I could go ahead and play another clip for a minute. And this clip is something that happening in the Congress, okay?
I didn't order a pizza.
I know, but that Parker promo saved me so much of my insurance. Brought you a little something special.
Parker, State Farm
Can you
offers
hear?
everyone surprisingly great rates.
You're the man.
And you want the real deal? Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Can the people hear it?
Yeah, go ahead.
My message, Congressman Jordan, is to get as many people vaccinated as quickly as we possibly can to get the level of infection in this country low, that it is no longer a threat. That is when. And I believe when that happens, you will see.
What determines when?
I'm sorry.
What measure? Are we just going to continue this forever, or when do we get to the point? What measure? What standard? What objective outcome do we have to reach before Americans get their liberty and freedoms back?
You're indicating liberty and freedom. I look at it as a public health measure to prevent people from dying and going to the hospital.
You don't think Americans' liberties have been threatened the last year, Dr. Fauci? They've been assaulted. Their liberties have.
I don't look at this as a liberty thing, Congressman Jordan.
Well, that's obvious.
As a public health thing.
But
I disagree with you on that.
You think the Constitution is suspended during a virus, during a pandemic? It's certainly not.
This will end for sure when we get the level of infection very low. It is now at such a high level. There's a threat again of major surges.
Dr. Fauci, over the last year, Americans' First Amendment rights have been completely attacked. Your right to go to church, your right to assemble, your right to petition your government, freedom of the press, freedom of speech have all been assaulted.
Okay, we don't have to hear the whole thing.
Yeah, I'll tell you what.
I mean,
Go ahead, Raymond. I was very surprised.
You see that this commitment among some Republicans to have what is called stunt politics.
Yeah.
Just doing something to get people pissed off at each other. And Ken talks about this all the time, but that's a little bit related to what you said,
Well, I think when I watched that clip, I think Dr. Fauci was a little cagey, and I think he really sandbagged Jordan to really get him, because obviously these are going to be the Republican talking points for the midterms, and they're going to be the Republican talking points going into 2024 from a political. That's the Republicans' political high ground. But I think Fauci he's a pretty cagey guy, and I think he really sandbagged Jordan. He could have just given him a simple answer here, and that would have been the end of the discussion.
I just didn't play the whole script. It wasn't the guy said, he wanted to say on what date this is going to happen. Nobody can come up with a date. Said,
I watched
the date? And the guy said, I can't give you a date.
But in the beginning, he was just asking for a metric. Fauci could have easily given him a metric. So I think Fauci.
He did. He did. He said, look, right now we have this number of incidents, okay? And we have to look at what the rate of infection is, and that's when we stop. And how much, but he wanted a date and all that. But anyway, we don't have to discuss that.
Well, the whole clip, Claiborne gives him a metric, which Fauci could have easily given. Depends on the definition of herd immunity, 90%, 10%.
Well, let's suppose that he did it. Is that going against the notion that this guy is trying to create division between, kind of putting public health measures and presenting them as somehow giving away freedoms and all that? Basically that was.
This Jordan's posture here was political sideshow. I think Fauci sandbagged him a bit and got him to look even more ridiculous because of the fact that he didn't just spit out a metric. And so I think Fauci got his licks in. I thought it was a very interesting exchange. So to finish up on this chapter, the author closed it out by saying this, talking about this country. This is a civilization searching for its humanity. She quotes Gary Michael Tarkoff, an American scholar of caste. It's dehumanized others to build its civilization, and now it needs to find its own humanity. That's what he's saying. And you know, I think that at some level, yeah, that can describe where we're at. But you know, from the concept of how realpolitik evolves, that's a very high level summary that implies we really want to find our humanity. And I'm not sure, at least some of the Republicans are necessarily interested in that. They want power. They want to rile up their base. They want to make arguments that resonate, even if they're false arguments. And this is, you know, the toxic politics that we have.
By the way, I am a little bit more charitable to Republicans. I think that there are some Republicans like that are trying to raise hell. And there's a bunch of other Republicans that do not have the courage to challenge them because they're afraid of being primary. You know, so,
Right.
I think some of those guys are really evil and, you know, and you know, really don't care about anything.
Right.
I mean, like Saddam Hussein or somebody, you know, lots of people die, they don't care. But there's a bunch of people that are just simply cowards. And this is the way I see it.
Well, the author makes a point when she talks about Nazi Germany. And the point that she makes in that is that the Reich arose not so much because it necessarily it rose to power basically on the acquiescence of the majority of the population. So if you're willing to cut the Republicans more slack because they're not willing to speak up, that's okay, but I don't think it gets them off the hook.
No, it doesn't give them off the hook, but it doesn't paint them as totally evil, okay?
Oh, no, I agree. But
It's not a good way
if you're not opening your mouth in opposition when we're seeing legislation that's going to suppress black and other minority voters in the name of voter fraud that never took place.
Yeah,
you know,
my argument
you
point
can't
is
defend that.
the minute you get a group of people and you say they're evil, all of a sudden you stop listening. You stop listening. You go ahead and label somebody with something bad, and you all of a sudden you don't listen. You know, I mean, and that's what I worry about. But anyway, we want to have a good discussion at the end. So can we move to the next chapter?
Yeah, I have the next chapter. The next chapter is Shedding the Scarlet Thread. The story is about a Brahmin caste young man in India, and the first telling is about how through some ritual at a Hindu temple, he receives this scarlet thread that's put around his neck and that he wears under his clothing at all times. And then the story goes on to tell about his father, who on a Sunday was out of the village looking at his land, and he felt that he was insulted by a Dalit, one of the untouchables. He then sought to chase that one, and the Dalit man defended himself, and the Brahmin man then fled. And at that point, I didn't know how the story was going to turn. I wondered whether it was going to end in the death of the Dalit man. But instead, to my surprise, it ended with shame on the Brahmin man because he had sort of given way and fled, and that was dishonorable. And so that Brahmin man who felt so dishonored and was viewed as dishonored left his family. So then the story picks up with the son, who's now without a father, who becomes a professional, moves to a city, and in his professional life is mixing with Dalits he realized that the man who chased his father wasn't content with his status, and neither are these other Dalits who have done surprisingly well to him. And he takes this to heart, and by the end of the chapter, gets rid of the scarlet thread. And so I want to read a few quotes from the very last page of this chapter. He says of that thread, "It was a poisonous snake around my neck, and its toxic venom was getting inside of me. Removing it amounted to renouncing his high caste. And he realized his family might reject him because of it. But he said it was a fake crown that we wear. My message would be to take off the fake crown." He wished every dominant caste would awaken to that fact, that they would be happier and freer without it, would see all of humanity. Anyway, I have located the corpse within my mind. I have given it a decent burial, and now my journey can begin. So this is the first chapter in the section of the book called Awakening. And so this was her first example of such an awakening to caste, and someone who acted on what he realized.
Well, let me mention something kind of interesting. I saw a video about this psychologist that is trying to get boys to be able to express feelings and all of that. And he talks about his childhood, that one day, he got beaten by somebody. And the guy was bigger and he ran away. And he said for years after that, they victimized him because he had not fought back and he was chicken and all of that. So here's an example of the same kind of thing. A boy is supposed to fight somebody, they do that and not be a coward and all of that. So that's kind of like the same thing that happened to this guy, and we're doing that to boys all the time.
Yeah, that is similar.
Yeah, there's a thing called a culture of honor, and it's strongest in the South among the Scotch-Irish descendants. And psychologists can actually determine that you're of Scotch-Irish heritage in an experiment by bumping into you in the hall and not apologizing. And then they take a swab and check for cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And it really plays into this. If you're a part of a honor culture and you perceive that somebody has wronged you, it's considered the worst possible thing you can do to not try to right that wrong. In other words, challenge them to a fight. And, you see it playing out in bars, every Saturday night, somebody looks at somebody the wrong way, and it's like, next thing you know, they're fighting. And it seems like the system she described here was very similar to that.
Yes.
But yeah, let me just expound on that. I read the same books the same thing about honor cultures. In fact, I read a lot because not only that, but the South European cultures are honor cultures, and they honor like it was a currency. You can look at. But what I want to say, I want to elaborate on the experiment that Ken just mentioned. They had these kids taking a test, or pretending to be taking a test, and then we're supposed to go somewhere else. And on the road, there was this guy working on something, and the guy said, "Oh, get the hell out of here. Don't stop me, So the guy said something like that. And then the guy, they went out somewhere to ask questions and they measured the cortisol and all of that. And you could tell the person was Southerner by the level of people from other culture would actually say, you know what happened? I walked out here and there's somebody called me a jerk, and they were laughing at it while the Southerners were going crazy, because they had been disrespected.
Yeah, and it made sense in a situation where there wasn't rule of law. If somebody stole something from you, you had to make it right or people would run all over you. It was like the Wild West.
Well, Ken, going back to something you and I had an argument about the value of forgiveness, okay? And if you live in a place where there's laws and stuff like that, if somebody killed your brother, it makes sense to forgive and all that because it's good for you psychologically. And the law is going to take care of the whole thing. But you're in the middle of the jungle, and in a small town, and somebody kills your somebody kills your brother or something, and you don't take revenge. You forgive. They'll keep coming. And in fact, there's a Bedouin story that is very interesting. Somebody stole the turkey. Okay, there's this Bedouin guy, and this person came. Hey, they stole his turkey, and he said, "Go ahead and find me the turkey." Yeah, well, why do you care about turkey? And then the next day, a couple of weeks later, they stole the guy's, horse, and the guy said, "Well, find me the turkey." And they tell something else, and then one day they took the land. They took his land, and he said, the minute we let that guy steal my turkey, that's when we lost everything. So, that's a very old Bedouin story. But anyway.
I know a story from the South Pacific, I think from, Papua New Guinea, maybe. The name of the story is Peace Child, and it was a culture where two tribes were revenge cultures. In other words, when one was wronged, the other culture would take revenge, and it just escalates. And in that culture, the way that peace was made was that they would take a newborn child of the leader in one tribe and give it to be raised in the other culture. And it was an act of how to end an escalation of revenge.
Anyway, I would say that almost all cultures are revenge cultures until there is a body of law. And in fact, let me tell you a little bit about ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, by the way, that the greatest contribution of the Roman was Roman law. I mean, it was unbelievable. A lot of, the Napoleonic Code and all that, Roman law. But in Rome, the problems about somebody killing somebody's brother and all of that was actually left to the family and the clan. So even though there was a lot of law, I mean, somebody killed a brother or something, the family was supposed to go out there and kill the other person or something. So, they only had gone halfway in the direction of having a system of law that you can actually survive not having revenge. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, we have two more chapters before the epilogue, two more stories.
Which one
Okay,
is
it's chapter 31, I believe, next. Okay, I've got chapter 31.
Well, I think I have to do something before you.
Oh, okay.
because they
You
have
got chapter,
the
you got chapter,
radicalization of the dominant caste comes just before 31.
Yeah, it's between 30 and 31.
yeah, okay.
Okay, here is it's about the situation that this woman was actually eating. I mean, eating in a in a fancy restaurant, and she was eating with this big lady, you know, this lady from the dominant class, and the waiters just kept passing by and not doing anything and all that. And I did mention, by the way, that that happened to me when I was eating with a guy that was actually brown. But anyway, the big point that woman makes is that uh, she could never have gotten away getting angry at the discrimination. It was actually a pejorative, not pejorative, what's the word that I want? I want a word here and I can't get it out. It's a privilege, or it's a something that a dominant class can do. Okay, and you know she couldn't do it, and she and as I reflected about that, you know, one of the things that I did reflect about that, I tried to get empathy, and I said, how would I be if I had to live with those humiliations all the time and not be able to do anything? And I have been humiliated a few times and all that, and it really bothers me. And so anyway, the other point that she makes is that this woman, when she saw that, she radicalized herself. She was able to understand, as a result of this experience, what was it like to be black, okay? And I thought that was a kind of like a, I mean, really, really a positive thing. Now, I wanted to mention something about me in relation to that, as being somebody, when you, many people, even though I'm white racially, do not consider me white. When they say white people, they don't consider a person who comes from Cuba white. And they, well, I went to live in New York, in New Jersey. And at the time that I went to live in New Jersey in the 1980, there was an incredible discrimination against Puerto Ricans. Okay? You know, people would come to me, you know, say, well, you're Cubans, you're not like the Puerto Ricans and all that. It was unbelievable how, you know, West Side Story and all of that. And when I went ahead and talked to clerks and stuff like that, I got treated really badly. And I was just acting the way I acted in Miami and all that. And then over time, without knowing a lot of things, I started being very polite. I started saying, sir, would you help me here? I became really polite. And when I became really, you know, differential, even to somebody who was pumping gas, that stopped. So, you know, I mean, here's an example where I was not part of the dominant class. And I had to kind of get this just sir, you know, whatever, you know, a lot of respect. Today, I would never challenge an American, white or whatever, you know, I mean, if there's a problem in a store or something, I would be very, very careful. I can't challenge them. I would do something and all that because I'm afraid, you know, get killed or something. But anyway, it's very interesting. My wife came from Argentina, where she was the richest person in her town, and she was the an artist, you know, with 8 UNICEF, you know, holiday cars. She was the head of public relations of the Argentine, you know, Bureau of the Census. She was in, you know, whatever. So she grew up being in the dominant class in Argentina. And she comes here, and I can't believe how she challenges, you know, people working their house and all that. And I keep telling her not to do that, but she grew up in that environment, and she has no idea the trouble she can get in. And I sometimes telling me, you were a man, they would have killed you. I mean, I think she gets away with what she does because she's a woman. But I'm just trying to relate that even though I'm not black and all of that, I'm not really I'm trying to fake it, except for my Pence haircut, but Pence, if I wanted to look like Pence, I would have to have a part right here. Okay? But anyway, but I dress the right way and all that. But even today, I don't dare. I would not dare to challenge a white person not not a black person either. But I mean, if somebody does something, a clerk or something, my DNA right now said don't challenge that person because you're gonna get into trouble, like I got in New Jersey. So anyway, that's kind of like uh, that's what that chapter is about. Okay. Any comments on that chapter?
My comment is that I thought it was very interesting. The authoress was, excited in some ways by the fact that her friend just really bowed up, but also in some ways also envious of the fact that she could get away with it. I think, I can think in my own example. I've been in restaurants in a couple different locations overseas where it was very, the light bulb was very slow to glow that most of the restaurant's patrons didn't care for the fact that there was two Americans eating in their restaurant. And, at the end of the day, in these situations, we always triumphed because if the food was slow, we just drank more. And, I've been in that mode where I've seen slow bell service, and after a while you realize hey, they kind of just really wish you weren't here. And
I had that experience in Japan, and I was eating, and I am not a particularly I violate all kinds of rules when I eat. I talk sometimes with my mouth and all that, and kind of messy and all that. I'm not even acceptable to Americans, okay, the way I behave, or my mother or my family. And you should see the faces those Japanese had on me when they saw me eat. It was just like, what an animal eating like that. Anyway, maybe we can go to Ken now.
Yes.
In chapter 31, Isabella Wilkerson was having a really bad day. She'd been a widow for about 18 months. A week prior, her mother had died. Trump had just got elected, and her heating and air conditioning guy came by to service her AC unit and came back and told her her basement was flooded. And he helped her get her sump pump started. It wasn't working, but she called and some contractor sent a plumber there. And when the plumber arrived, to her, he was the personification of a Trump supporter. And in her mind, he was rude and seemed to be uncaring. And in her mind, when he asked her if he was at the right house, she assumed that he was a little bit shocked that a black woman answered the door, and then a lot of times she was mistaken for the help in her neighborhood. And so they go down to the basement, and she says to him, the reason it got flooded is because I hardly ever come down here. My husband used to do it, and he died. And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, didn't. And then they went through this dance, and she would suggest maybe it's this, and he'd dismiss it. No, it's not that. And he'd say something, and she'd say, no, that's that. So basically, they were two people whose hearts were at war. And then she described what happened as a minor miracle. And what she meant by that was the two hearts at war made that connection across caste that she talks about in the epilogue. And she said she sensed that his mother wasn't alive. She just kind of had that intuition. So she said to him, my mother died last week. And is your mother still alive? And he kind of dropped his head and he said, no, she isn't. And she died in 1951. She was only 52 years old. And so she said, you know, that's not old at all. And he said, no, it wasn't. My father, he's still alive, but he's as mean as they come. And that gave her a little bit of empathy. She's thinking, well, you know, maybe his attitude could be explained by understanding what kind of father he had. And she said, something like, well, we miss them when they're gone, and no matter what they're like. And then he did something that was kind of surprising. He said, what about your mother? How old was she? And she tells about the mother and that she'd been sick for a long time and so forth. And then he started talking about his aunt, whatever you want to call it, and said, she's 80 some years old and she still smokes and drinks and everything. And they had a little chuckle over that. And you're thinking if one of her friends from the New York Times were to peek in and see her and this guy laughing together, they probably would have said it was a miracle. Or if one of his friends from the Plumbers Union had seen it, he would probably described it as a miracle. And the rest of the story was, you know, he asked her to help him move something so they could see the drain. He went out the truck, got a light, he hunted, he finally found the problem was the water heater. He turned off the water to the water heater, didn't charge her an exorbitant amount, left, came back later because he remembered that he should have turned off the gas to the heater and everything. And she described this as a minor miracle. And I agree with her. That's fits the definition of a miracle when two people are that separate and they finally connect and see each other as humans. But I wouldn't call it a minor miracle because the thing that's important was that she actually reached out to him and they connected. And it doesn't matter whether it's her and her plumber or if it's Yasser Arafat and Menachem Begin at Camp David. When that happens, it's the intent of the person who reaches out that's important. And you know, in that sense, all of these kinds of miracles are the same. And the other thing about these events is when it happens, it impacts other people that you don't even know about and that you've never met. Because you could just imagine that plumber the next time he goes to a house and a black woman comes to the door, it might be him that's actually reaching out. He might be getting judged and he might reach out, or he might change his attitude toward his father or whatever, you don't know, but there's all sorts of chain reactions that can happen from this. And the other thing is the impact of these kinds of events grow at a hyper exponential rate because a single pair of cats in 7 years would produce 2 million offspring because they produce 2 litters of cats a year and their offspring produce 2 litters of cats. When you have an opportunity to do an entire litter of miracles every day, you meet that many people every day and you have an opportunity to reach out to them. So, you know, I think this course is just the perfect example of what she describes in the epilogue. She says each time a person reaches across caste to make a connection, it helps break the back of caste. So that's pretty much it for that chapter.
That's a great summation. I really
Yes.
like
Oh,
that.
very good. Let me mention a couple of things. One of them is that when I have to bring a contractor into my house, I'm very afraid that that person is going to, it's going to be a Trump supporter, see me with a Spanish accent, my wife and all that. So as a survival skill, I, I start having a conversation with that person about do they have family, what's happening. So, the contractor I had said, do you have a Wi-Fi? I always establish a conversation with the person so he sees me as a human being. Okay? So, I'm kind of like, all of this stuff don't come to me naturally. I have to learn about it. It's kind of, in my case, I tend to calculate rather than feel that much, like I'm the kind of person who have to read books on how to treat your wife because, I don't get it. Anyway, but over the years, what I do, if I ever go anywhere nowadays, like a store or the pharmacist and all that, I bend over to say, how you doing today? If somebody's standing by me on the line and said, how you doing today, ma'am, and all that. And I haven't thought about it, but I started thinking that if I do that, I am softening, you know, I know that if I look well dressed and I look educated, and at the same time, I'm kind to that person, I reduce a little bit the racism or whatever you call it that they have against Spanish people. Even though I can very easily, how would I say it, smart. I don't know. I learned a long time ago how to fake it to a great degree, but I can't fake my accent. So and you have a person, whatever. So I kind of looking all the time how to protect myself and, make diffuse and all that, and make sure that I do that. And I kind of help some people. But, I had to pick up those skills here to survive to some extent.
Well, and I think that the things that you do out of it, you develop these habits. I think, abstracting away from how you've made those decisions, I think the value of it is it sets a tone for a potential conversation, and it really, I won't use the word reset, but it sets a tone that establishes whether you're going to go on to have a conversation or not. It's a very open, welcoming way to be, and I think that's a very good way to disarm someone else who may operate more on bias than they realize. So I think there's power in the things you describe.
Well, there's another thing that I do. If I am ever with one of those people and they ask me what I do, I never say I'm a professor.
Yeah.
I always say I'm a teacher. And then if they ask me, what do you teach? Then I tell them. But at the beginning, I start with something humble. Because if I say, all of a sudden, the guy say I fix houses and boilers and all that, and I say I'm a professor, all of a sudden I'm going to put myself above that person and create a problem. So, and all of this is calculated because, I wasn't born. Somebody like Ken probably was born with these instincts, but I basically developed them as a way of survival and, not getting into trouble.
Well, Paul used a key word there. He said habit. It's you develop it as a habit. And then that course we took at the beginning, that guy at the University of Chicago, they did all of these experiments with people on the commuter trains and the museums and so forth. And, your commute can be torturous, or it can be a very pleasant experience. And all it takes is to smile and say hi to the person sitting next to you and ask them how they're doing. And for some reason, we're afraid to do that. We're afraid that we're interfering with them or they don't like it or whatever. But they collected tons of data and said, well, it works. It makes your commute more pleasant. It makes the commute of the person sitting with you more pleasant.
Well, I do that even in the elevators. You know, I mean, if I'm with somebody in the elevator, I say, "How you doing today?" I mean, you know, I try to establish conversation, and all of that is kind of like based upon, you know, first of all, I kind of like people. You know, I like to be kind to people. But on the other hand, I know that when I do that, I'm going to be in less trouble. I mean, you know, if I'm going to get in trouble, I'm not going to get in that much trouble. And, you know, when I do that, after a little while, I enjoy it because you wouldn't believe how many interesting things people tell you. You ask them.
Absolutely. I mean,
Really a lot of really interesting things.
that was going to be the comment I was going to make. So my wife says I'll talk to anybody. I really enjoy having conversations, and exactly what Raymond said. You'd be surprised what you can learn from someone in a brief conversation. It's just I like to chit chat with folks, and you know, it usually starts with how you do, and I kind of do some of the same things that Raymond does, and I've always found it to be fascinating. And you know, I chuckle when Raymond says that he never tells people that he's a professor. And in the
I do tell some.
Yeah.
I do tell some, but I don't tell that to somebody who's having a much harder time in life than I do. You know.
In the early years when I sailed, it's nearly impossible to explain to someone in a few sentences what the merchant marine is all about. It's kind of it's not a hard idea to get, but it's a hard idea to explain to people. And after a number of years of trying to explain, well, what do you do? I said, well, I'm in the merchant marine, and he blah 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 blah. I finally shortened it up. I said, what do you do? I work in the import-export business. I had to shorten it up because, you know, when you say merchant marine, the only thing that most people in America think of is 1776 and, you know, give me liberty or give me death, or iron ships and wooden men. They have no idea that the majority of the world's goods travel by ship. And, you know, you just can't explain you can't illuminate that enough to have value. So I had to shorten it up because I just, you know.
Anyway, let me correct something what I said. I shouldn't say I do. I should have said I try.
Yeah.
Because I do have a big ego, and I do like to listen to myself talk. Okay.
Nothing wrong with an ego.
Yeah, I do like to listen to my thing, and when you know, my goal as a kid was actually, you know, to become a person with a culture. And, you know, and every time I talk about something, you know, whatever, I feel, oh, look at that. You actually cultivated yourself. I have all this thing going on, and then having Asperger's, I like to give lectures. So I could say that it's always a struggle to behave.
You know, even telling people you're in the import-export business, that's kind of a conversation ender. Never get a lot of questions about it. So after a while, you know, I used to just kind of stay away from the subject. But even saying that, almost never get a follow-up question.
Did we finish the book, by the way?
I'll read a quote. In a world without caste, instead of a false swagger over our own tribe or family or a community, we would look upon all of humanity with wonderment.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a beautiful statement.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of connecting with people and listening, that certainly connects with the David Brooks article, Ramon, that you referred to, and the idea of learning from people. You know, it was, I really liked this book immensely.
Even the last line in this chapter is just, it's profound. A world without caste would set everyone. A world without caste would set everyone free.
By the way, let me mention another thing. I always read this article by Edsal in the New York Times.
Yeah.
That take me about an hour to read because you know, he doesn't give his opinion. He looks at the topic, And the latest article that he had was about what's happening to business, in relationship with the Republican Party. And there was a group of people that were actually talking that, you know, what the business is doing, they're all about money. They're all about money, and, you know, they're doing it because of who they're going to sell and how they're going to do that. And, you know, but there was a person who argued that some of this behavior is actually moral behavior. When people see, you know, somebody kill a black, strangle a black man in the street, and, you know, there is a bunch of people that actually, I mean, I wouldn't say they all, you know, I mean, part of the behavior of business is not only money, is that a bunch of people in power are being radicalized in the same way that that woman, what is it? The same way that a woman in the restaurant became radicalized. So, you know, I think you can, it's very easy to dismiss people as saying they did that because it's in their, you know, it's just the money, you know, minimize somebody else's. Anyway, many years ago when I was a Catholic, I get really upset about people minimizing saints.
Mm-hmm.
They would say things like, well, that saint think that if they suffer all this stuff here, they're going to go to heaven, so they're making a rational decision. You know, Mother Teresa is making a rational decision, his mindset to maximize his chance in heaven and all that. And I would get really upset because what we're doing is minimizing the good stuff that person was doing, you know. So anyway, that's kind of, I don't know what that comes to, but anyway, that's, I think we can go ahead and discuss what we're going to, the next point.
Well, I'm going to be here just a couple more minutes, so go ahead. But
Well, I was thinking about
bow out.
Well, that's not a problem, but yeah, we could do that the next time. But remember, maybe that's a way to start the next time, so people have a time to reflect about it. And the questions that I abstracted from the epilogue said how our look about whites, blacks, and society at large has changed as a result of having seen these 3 books. Has it transformed us? So I'm thinking about spirit and body. You know, how has it changed our spirit, our way of thinking, our morality, and all kinds of things like that. And then the second question is, you know, are we intending to do something about it? Okay. And my suggestion is that could be a long time. So I think what we want to do is just do that for the next time and start with that.
Good.
Does that make sense? Anyway, I'm going to put this in a private link for the 4 of us and Kendris and myself, so that see if I can rail in, you know, Kendris to be here next week. Okay. Let me just mention something about Kendris, by the way, just quickly. I met somebody who worked with Kendris at Breakthrough. And I didn't quite understand how this woman got to be the top person. It turns out that she was in charge of getting people to give jobs to people with autism. And she was great at that. She probably called people on the phone and all that. So she found a metric that there could not be any doubt that she was doing it. In fact, this woman was telling me, if you compare Breakthrough on the rate of people, of autistic people that they service, that they place in jobs, is much higher than in the population of autistic people and other organizations. This woman found this metric, and I bet you that she did it on the phone and all that. So she found a metric that she could essentially get rid of any. I mean, it was clear that this woman, you know, was doing that, and that was the goal of Breakthrough. it was clear that she was the right person. But I wonder what would have happened to her if there was not such a clear metric involved in her case, you know?
I am wanting to invite her to speak to my executive in residence class. I have each year
Oh, wow.
I've had somebody from a nonprofit come. And in the past, I've had Elaine Strino from Second Harvest and Bert Rosen from CARM. But I think that Kendris would be a very good example to have. So I intend to ask her.
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking is that given that she comes from a Black background, it's very likely that she has a lot of powerful contacts. And I have a suspicion that her talents might be higher than what she can do by working at Breakthrough, which is a whatever. So I have a feeling that this woman, if she was exposed to more people, she might rise much higher, you know? And
Well, anyway, I was excited to meet her last Friday, and she would be an excellent role model for the GLS seniors.
What is GLS?
Global Leadership Scholars. It's the honors program within the Haslam College of Business, undergraduate honors program.
Just one more thing. I think that today's meeting was great. I think it might have been the best we ever had. You know, I don't know.
Well, I have enjoyed how we've sharing the chapters is definitely good, and I enjoyed y'all's summaries of the chapters, and see y'all next week.
Ramon, I don't know if we're going to have time to get 2 Evil Geniuses next week.
No, I didn't mean to. You know, I'm thinking, Ken, not a long thing. I was thinking about 5-minute summary of it.
Okay. And that there was one of those books about I'd rather be casinos or something. I was going to look at that too. I asked her if you could read one book or what would be one she would recommend, and that was the one she mentioned.
And you know her comment that struck me was that it was an interesting book, but also lighthearted. And I get this impression that she looked at the 4 of us and maybe thought we were a little too sullen. maybe she thought she needed to liven us up a bit, like she was taking care of the group, because that was an interesting comment. That it struck me that, well, she's already made some observations about the group and she's trying to help us.
Can I just mention something? When I had her here, one of the things that I do is talk to myself a lot. And I started saying, am I actually assuming something about a woman that I should not assume just because she's Black, okay? And, and one of the assumptions I was making is that this woman would only be interested in talking about race. And, that's not a valid assumption. I think that woman would really enjoy the discussion we're going to have next week. And we cannot assume that she just wants to know, to know about race. I mean, we have to let her kind of, we have to learn what she likes and what she would enjoy, rather than assuming because she's Black, she's going to do that. Now, but that doesn't mean that Ken is not right. That would be a good thing, but let's kind of listen from her what she wants to do,
It would be interesting to hear more about the book she recommended.
Yeah, me too. I want to do that, but I want to give her the option of saying, this is what I want to do,
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go.
All right. Have a good have a good week, Bobby. Good chat with everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.